There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, lovely people. I'm Shawn the Book Maniac, and this is a short introduction to the discussion video soon to follow. A discussion of this novel by an Uruguayan American writer, The President and the Frog. There is the name that was printed on the cover. Alba of Seriela and I had a lovely conversation about this book. That's what you're going to watch. We taped it 2 or 3 weeks ago, and just the other day I found out that sometime, I'm not exactly sure, but sometime in 2023, this author has changed their name and their pronouns. They now are Caro De Robertis, and their pronouns are they and them. So I think that's fabulous. I'm excited for Caro De Robertis and their journey, and I have tried to patch up the video discussion rather than redo it. I read out the name as was written on the book one time, and then all subsequent references, I've just edited out the name and it's De Robertis. And I have removed any pronouns that have become problematical. So there might be a few sentences that don't have pronouns, and I've done a couple awkward voiceovers to make this video as much of a support and celebration of Caro De Robertis as it is a rousing discussion on their last novel. Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to a very special guest, one of my favorite people, not only on BookTube, but in the world. This is Alba of the On Again, Off Again lovely BookTube channel, Seriela, joining us from Puerto Rico. Hello, Alba.
Hello, Shawn. I'm so
How
glad
lovely
to be here.
I'm so happy to be here with you. This is our first ever buddy read, or what I would call a pseudo buddy read. And so thank you for doing this with me. What I mean by a pseudo buddy read is that Alba and I have not checked in with each other on Voxer after every 5 chapters, once a week. We've dispensed with all that. And I like that kind of buddy read too. But for this, which is what I call a pseudo buddy read, we haven't discussed anything. And now we're going to meet up on Zoom and candidly discuss the book. So here we are, and the book, you're probably wondering, what is the book? It is this 2021 novel from a Uruguayan American writer. It's called The President and the Frog by Carolina de Robertis, and the author of a novel from 2019 that I read and loved called Cantoras. And that's why I was very eager to read the second novel that I have read. De Robertis writes in English, so this is not a translated book, and to my knowledge, none of them have been translated. They've all been written in English. Certainly, Cantoras was, and also Alba and I've talked before this about spoilers, and we don't think this is the book that it's possible to spoil. There is one key aspect of where the story leads us right to the core of the president's being that we don't think we're going to talk about in any detail. But if we change our mind, you will be amply warned that we're getting into spoiler territory, but we don't anticipate we're even going to go near it. So if you don't hear me say we're about to get into spoiler territory, you are safe to watch this video from start to finish. And Alba and I have now read it, and here we are to share our feelings and our intellectual insights. Why don't you start, Alba?
Well, I thank you so much for this, right? This opportunity, as I thank many people with whom I buddy read, because if it hadn't been that way, I would never read the book. I had heard so much about the other book, Cantoras. I haven't read that one yet. I plan to, but I was struck and I bought the book. I took the cover off. The cover is around here somewhere. I bought the book because I heard it on somebody else's BookTube channel who reviewed it highly, right? Really loved the book. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I had an inkling about what it was about. A president, a beloved president. And there was a wave of beloved presidents in the past decade, right? from Latin America. It could have been any one of those. But when you know that the author is from Uruguay, well, then, the most logical common sense thing is that it would have been Jose Mujica, who a lot of people call Pepe Mujica. And, that just was like the icing on the cake for me, because here in Puerto Rico, and among us, circle of people that I know and friends, for example, that I have on Facebook, would every once in a while post quotes from Pepe Mujica, even though he is no longer in the presidency. Why? Because he is an iconic figure. He was a political prisoner, which is what is going on in this book. It is a back and forth story, right? We start off where this elderly gentleman who used to be the president, who is no longer the president, is puttering around in his house, his very humble home, waiting for a Norwegian journalist to interview him. And he's puttering around with his plants and making his mate, which I long to try one day. Probably
You and
won't
me
like
both.
it. Probably won't like it, but because it's bitter and I tend to like sweet things. But it is such a characteristic of that region, that southern hemisphere. From Uruguay, people drink it. Argentina, people drink it. And he makes that as he's puttering around in the morning with his little three-legged dog, thinking about what, he has done so many interviews. And it's true, because afterwards, after I read the book, I'm all over the place, Shawn, because I really love this. After I read it, I went and found some interviews. And it's true. He did like a ton of interviews. So he's in his head, he's talking about, okay, I'll probably expect, this kind of an interview, and it's going to go such and such a way, and I hope it goes well. And then it goes back and forth. We have another chapter, and it goes back and forth, alternating between his imprisonment in solitary confinement. Correct me if I'm wrong, Shawn, for 4 years, was it, that he was in
I
solitary?
think about that. I think the solitary was about 4 years. Yes.
Yes. In total, he was in prison for 14 years because he had been a revolutionary. He had been part of the Tupamaros. It doesn't mention the group in the book, right? This is a completely fictionalized account. But it talks about how he was in prison because of that, during a oppressive period in his country's history. And he wasn't the only one in prison. Most of the revolutionaries wound up in prison also. And it's about how he survived in that solitary confinement. The frog comes in because as he's trying to maintain his sanity, the frog comes as a way to cling and maintain that sanity. I came to realize that later, because I'm not a person who is really into talking animals and hallucinatory things. As we progress, we're alternating back and forth between the interview with the Norwegian journalist and his confinement and his conversations with the frog. The frog is very snarky, very critical. I want to read this in Spanish now, because I want to know what the curse words were. I want to know the curse words in Spanish, because the frog will curse him out and he will curse the frog back, which later on I came to realize was part of at a certain point, it says that the presence of the frog was combating his stupor. If it hadn't been for the frog, he would have fallen into a stupor, right? And it would have been as if he had given up, right? And this is a man, I'm telling you, even before I read the book, I told you already, my friends on Facebook would be posting his little sayings all over the place, right? It's a person who, loves to philosophize, and he was an idealist and had that past. And it would have been, to me, it would have been a shame, a great loss, if he had succumbed to the stupor and not spoken to the frog, which was, essentially his own brain, right, working. If he had succumbed to the stupor, we would never have known the president. We would never have gotten this iconic figure, who is beloved, so beloved that this young novelist did this piece of work and imagined a frog for him that helped him to overcome solitary confinement and what that can do to a person. There were moments, especially towards the end, where I was so very touched by what he had to endure and how the frog got him to tell stories. And it was in the telling of the stories, right, that he kept clinging on to his sanity. And the frog kept digging. I want more stories. That's not enough. Keep telling me some stories. And he finally gets to Sophia. And there is a real Sophia. And how important that was. And by that time, I'm bawling, I'm crying, because, when you come from a place in which you know that there are such things as political prisoners, and you have them in your culture, and you have seen them in the flesh and blood, and you have read about how they suffered. And, I'm thinking about all our political prisoners, right? Some have already passed, right? Some are still with us. And what they had to endure, right, while they were in prison. We had one of our political prisoners was in prison longer than Nelson Mandela. And he got out, I think, under Obama, before Trump, he got out. I kept thinking about all these political prisoners in our own history. And to see this man, to read about him, I could feel the love and admiration that this author had for this person. That is rare. It's rare that a young person would respect and admire a political figure so much to this, to this extreme, to make up like a little frog who saved his sanity so that he could become president, and such a beloved president as he has been, not only to Uruguay, but to the rest of Latin America, because he's become a symbol of what is possible. It's a person of utmost integrity. They call him the poorest president in the world because he did not live in the presidential palace. And he kept on living in this small farm, 1-bedroom farm. After the presidency, he's continued to farm and take care of his animals. His wife continues being part of the government as a senator. And, people who are still involved, people who still are part of the rank and file everyday person. As he mentions, just because you're a president doesn't mean that you have to be in a palace separated from, as if we were living in feudal times. I find it so refreshing. I find it filled me with lots of hope in a time in which, here especially, we've been seeing so much gentrification and so much devastation, people leaving, displacement, inflation, besides the, natural events that happen. I really love this book. And I'm going to read the rest
Of their
backlist for sure, because this just blew me away. And then after I finished, as I DM'd you, I started watching all the YouTube videos that I could find. And I just love him. I just love him. And you can see through, there are videos from 9 years back, and then there are videos from 1 year ago. And you can tell, he himself admits it, how he's been aging. His little dog is no longer there and things like that. But it's just such an inspiration after all that's happened in Latin America, and that somebody like that should have existed. It's just, So yeah, I'm in love. Can I tell
Well,
you?
that's absolutely fabulous. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know how closely this novel hewed to recent Uruguayan history until I got your text a few hours ago. I think it's a crime that he's not more well known outside of Latin America, because he is a really inspiring figure. He is 88 years old, and he was in office as president from 2010 to 2015.
5 years. They only get 5 years.
5-year term.
He legalized gay marriage while he
Legalized gay
was
marriage.
there, and legalized marijuana. And he did so many things in those 5 years.
One of the parts I marked that made me fall in love with him, at least the president of the novel, but it seems like everything that goes into the characterization or any of the facts given, there aren't a lot of facts, because it's kind of an everyman president. It could be from any Latin American country, but anything that's in here that is more concretely factual is actually true about Mojica. But the Norwegian journalist is asking him why he never even got a maid when he became president. And he said, "What about the new demands on your time?" And he answered, "Ha! Time to sweep is also time to think."
I should apply that to myself.
Yeah, you and me both.
That's another reason why he inspired me.
Well,
love this so much.
what I expected was going to happen during this conversation is already happening, because I didn't love this book to the depths that you did, but I fully expected, and it's already starting to happen, that you were going to pull me in deeper and make me appreciate this book more. It's such a different novel from Cantoras. Cantoras is full of characters, and it's brimming with sexuality. It's one of the sexiest novels I've read in a long time. And it has a lot of politics in it too, but it's just such a large cast of characters that are all interlinked, and there was a whole bunch of interpersonal things going on. This one is not like that. There's really, well, I guess there's, what would you say, four main characters. There's the president, the ex-president, the Norwegian journalist, the frog, and his wife, who was also one of his compatriots, one of his comrades. So there wasn't a lot of interpersonal stuff going on. I think probably I would have taken to it more if I hadn't read Cantoras first. It was such a different type of read. I struggled with the frog for the same reasons that you've so well articulated. I don't really deal with talking animals, but I was won over when we got down to the nut of the issue that the frog enabled him to get down to, where we got down to that core story that was the fundamental core of the
Mhm.
man. I
Mhm.
appreciated what the frog was in the story for, and
Mhm.
that was lovely. I probably still feel that I would have rather read a biography of the actual president or a memoir by him than this novel. But I appreciate this novel all the more just having listened to you. And it introduced me to a man that I should have known a lot about already, but now I want to find out a whole bunch more.
I read the authors afterward, and which mentions a lot of books.
That they used.
Right. You know what? You know my mom a little bit. I think my mom would love this book.
Yes, yes.
There is
And I
a,
think she would love to know who Pepe Mujica is. I think
I
so.
think so very much. And I think he,
Hmm.
more than me, would take to some of the simple, powerful aspects of the story and the symbolism, if I can use that word, or maybe just images of the gardening.
Oh,
And we're not,
yes.
yeah. So
Yes,
one of my favorite
absolutely.
sentences that I'm thinking might end up becoming a Sunday sentence I
Mhm.
marked is gardening and tending the soil is a big deal in this novel. And here is my favorite sentence in the book. When you have your own vegetable garden, you unclasp just a little from the mercenary webbing of the human realm.
Wow.
All of the politics, all of this left wing socialism,
Yes,
it's just all beautifully concentrated
yes,
in that one sentence.
absolutely. Oh, I love so many different things about this. Uh, One of the things that stood out for me from our history, because when I read, I'm always comparing what has
Absolutely.
happened in Puerto Rico. And as I told you, we've had our own political prisoners. One of them had a love story like this one, right? In which he has a relationship before going to prison. And when he comes out, he resumes that relationship, and that is Don Heriberto Marin, who was in prison after the 1950s insurrection. He was 16 years old, 16 or 17 years old. And he had already met this young girl. I think she was the daughter of the mayor. So he's thinking as a poor, campesino, that he would have no luck with her at all. And when he came out of prison 9 years later, he met her at a party and was surprised that she remembered him. And she told him, "I've been waiting for you." And every time he tells that story, I cry. And so when the author mentions the first lady and how they found each other after prison, uh, I just thought immediately of Don Heriberto. And it's just a lovely, lovely story.
It was not simply a political tale. It very much was grounded in the personal, and that relationship in particular was powerfully narrated. I certainly
And the mother,
the
and his
mother, yes.
mother, yes, how important she was, and how it pained him to think of her going to jail and seeing him, or not seeing him, and then how crucial she was to his reading afterwards,
To his
because she
reading,
got
yes.
him, and what kind of books he
Books.
could read, because they wouldn't let him read fiction. They'd only let him read science books. Can you imagine, Shawn, if they only limited you to reading science books?
Well, I think I might have more interesting conversations with Doris.
Yeah.
I think I did a tag once of just for a quick aside. I think I once did one of Doris's tags where she said, "Name two or three of your favorite science books." And I thought, I have never read a book that had anything to do with science in my life.
And I've only read science books for the book two prizes.
Well, there you go. So, Alba, I'm so glad we had this conversation because I feel much more connected to this book because I talked about it with you. I felt connected to it by the end, but it was really in the last few chapters or whatever where I started to
Mhm,
feel an emotional connection with what I was reading.
mhm.
And now I really do. So thank you for that. And
Oh,
let's
thank
do
you
this
so
again
much,
next year,
Shawn.
shall we?
Yes, we'll do another one. I'll read Cantoras in the meantime.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, my dear.
Take care, Shawn. Say hello to your mom and dad.